Hi, I'm Venna. My sister stood there in front of everyone, called my life's work garbage, and deleted it with a single click, smirking while the whole room watched me crumble. They said family means sacrifice, but no one told me it meant letting them steal everything I ever was, calling it love while they erased me. And the worst part? I stayed quiet. Until the day I didn't. What would you have done if your own sister erased you like that in front of everyone? Before we dive in, tell me, where are you listening right now, and what's the one thing your family would never want you to find out? Drop a comment below. I'm listening. So, Sunday dinners at my parents' place always felt like a performance I never auditioned for. I was there early, like I always was, hands smelling of dish soap and rosemary from the chicken I helped Mom season before she disappeared to watch her shows. The dining table was heavy with roast, mashed potatoes, and collard greens, the kind of meal that made the whole house smell warm. But there was nothing warm about the way Isolde sat at the head of the table, tapping away on her phone, nails clicking with each swipe. "Venna, sweetie, grab your brother another beer, would you?" Dad called out, not even glancing up from the game on TV. Of course I did. I always did. I served plates, refilled drinks, wiped up spills no one else noticed. I was the youngest, the helper, the good girl who didn't make a scene, even when my hands shook from exhaustion after working a full week at Peyton Analytics. While I was clearing plates and fetching a forgotten fork, Isolde's voice cut through the hum of small talk like a blade. "Before we dig into dessert, I'd like to toast to family progress," she announced, standing, raising her wine glass, her smile gleaming as if she owned every light in the room. I paused, half hidden behind my dad's chair, a dish towel in hand, as she went on about a new client retention system she claimed she had developed, detailing how it would change the way Peyton handled accounts, improve loyalty, boost revenue. The same system I had poured hours into drafting after bedtime when my son was asleep, scribbling notes with a pencil I chewed down to nothing while sitting on the couch. Dad clapped her on the back, laughing proudly. "That's my girl, always moving up." Mom nodded with a tight-lipped smile, like she was watching a commercial she had seen 100 times but pretended to love. I swallowed hard, the taste of betrayal bitter under my tongue, forcing myself to keep quiet, telling myself, "Don't ruin dinner. Not again." My mother's voice echoed from years ago. "Keeping the peace is your gift, Venna. Don't lose that." So I scraped plates in the kitchen, water scalding my hands, scrubbing away the grease that wasn't even mine to clean. Each plate clinked against the sink, a quiet rebellion no one heard but me. The next morning, Monday, was unforgiving as usual. I dropped my son at school, gave him a quick hug, and made it to Peyton with coffee still too hot to drink. Isolde was already there, in her perfectly pressed blouse, tapping her heel while she read through emails. She didn't even look up when I walked in. I settled at my desk, opened my files, and saw her shadow fall across my screen. She glanced around to make sure the others were watching before she leaned in. "It's not personal, Venna. It's business," she said, like she was reading off a motivational quote poster. She clicked, once, twice, then a third time, dragging the file labeled Client Retention Strategy V to the trash. My strategy, my notes, weeks of follow-ups, analysis, test calls, ideas that came while folding laundry or driving through morning traffic, gone with a single flick of her manicured finger. "Garbage," she said, turning on her heel, heels clicking like the second hand on a clock, each tick another reminder of what she thought of me. Silence followed, thick and choking, as a few coworkers looked up then quickly back down, pretending to be busy with emails that could wait. I felt heat crawl up my neck, shame boiling into anger that I kept bottled behind clenched teeth. Something inside me shifted in that moment, like the earth cracking after too many storms. I realized that dinner wasn't just dinner, and this moment wasn't just about a file. This was about every time I had stayed quiet, let others take credit, let Isolde step over me with her polished shoes while I kept the peace, kept quiet, kept small. I spent my lunch break sitting in my car, parked beneath the only oak tree in the lot, staring at the dashboard while my hands gripped the steering wheel. I pulled out the old handkerchief from my purse, the one with "Hope" stitched in pale blue by my mother before she got too tired to hold a needle steady. I pressed it to my lips, breathing in the faint scent of lavender from the drawer it had lived in for years. Part of me wanted to let it all go, to keep the peace, to pretend none of it mattered. But I remembered the look in Isolde's eyes, the smirk, the certainty that I would stay silent because I always had. My phone buzzed. A message from Eris, the consultant I met at a conference last year. "Don't forget coffee tomorrow. We should talk about your ideas." "Seriously?" I read it twice, 3 times. The words pressing against the part of me that wanted more than quiet dinners and deleted files. I took a deep breath, wiped my tears on that old handkerchief, and turned the key in the ignition, not knowing if I was ready to let go or finally ready to choose myself. I pulled out of the parking lot, the handkerchief still clenched in my hand, my pulse echoing in my ears. The streets of Austin felt heavy that afternoon, the sun dipping lower, washing the road in orange light as I drove toward South Congress. I remember glancing in the rearview mirror at the tired woman looking back, her eyes red but clear. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't turning back home to do laundry or cook dinner while swallowing my pride. I was driving toward something I hadn't allowed myself to want, a way out. I parked in front of the coffee shop, the one with the mismatched chairs and the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans that always made me feel like time slowed down. Eris was already there, waiting by the window, waving as I walked in. She had that calm, knowing look, the one that always made people open up without realizing it. "Hey, you look different," she said as we sat down, her eyes searching mine like she could read what had happened just hours before. "I guess I feel different," I said, folding the handkerchief and tucking it into my purse, pressing it down like it could hold all the fear trying to claw its way out of me. Eris leaned back, tapping her cup. "Venna, I've seen the way you handle clients. You remember details, birthdays, you send them notes when their kids graduate. You build trust, not just numbers. That's rare, and it's valuable." I looked down at the table, tracing the grain of the wood with my finger, thinking of all the times I had been told I was too soft, too emotional, too invested to succeed in business. How Isolde would laugh. "This isn't charity work, Venna," every time I brought up a client's personal need during meetings. "It doesn't feel valuable where I am," I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. She raised an eyebrow. "It should, and it will, if you let it." The barista brought over our coffee, and as I reached for the cup, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a reminder for my son's soccer schedule or an update from the school. Instead, it was an email from HR at Peton Analytics, flagged urgent. Subject: correction to ownership credit documentation. I opened it, the words swimming on the screen for a moment before they sharpened, cutting into me like glass. The credits I had earned from the retention project, the small stock bonus tied to the system I had built, were now under Isolde's name. No mention of me, no explanation, just a bland statement. Per management review, ownership credits have been updated accordingly. I felt the coffee cup in my hand tremble, warmth spilling onto my skin as I tried to steady my breathing. Eris's voice cut through the fog. "Venna, you okay?" I turned the phone around, letting her read it. She pressed her lips together, shaking her head slowly. "She did this to you?" I swallowed, the memory of Isolde's smirk that morning flashing in my mind, the way she had leaned down and whispered, "It's not personal, it's business." My fingers tightened around the cup, a heat rising that wasn't from the coffee but from somewhere deeper, older. Growing up, I was the peacemaker, the good one. Even when Isolde stole my dolls or told Mom I broke the vase she had shattered, I stayed quiet. When Mom was dying, holding my hand with a grip that didn't match her frail body, she whispered, "Don't let them tell you who you are." I had nodded, tears soaking the pillow, but I had let them tell me, over and over again. "Venna," Eris said softly, pulling me back. "You're better than this place, better than the way they treat you." I shook my head, blinking fast. "But this is everything I've worked for. My son's future, our security. It's tied to this job, this company. If I walk away, they'll keep taking, she finished for me, her voice gentle but firm, because they know you'll let them. There was a moment, quiet but heavy, as the cafe buzzed around us. Eris reached into her bag and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table with a pen. I glanced down, seeing a figure written in clear ink, $960,000, along with a note about equity and the chance to build a team under my name. "This is real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's real," she replied. "You deserve to build something that's yours, Venna. You're not meant to stay small." I picked up the card, the edges pressing into my skin, the number blurring as tears pooled. My fear screamed, reminding me of bills, of braces for my son, of the mortgage, of every reason I had to stay quiet. But beneath it, there was a flicker, a warmth that felt like the hope stitched on the handkerchief in my purse. Isolde's words rang in my head, "If you ever leave, you'll have nothing." But as I looked at Eris, the card in my hand, I realized Isolde was wrong. I had myself. I looked up at Eris, feeling the weight of everything Isolde had taken, and for the first time, I whispered the truth out loud. "I'm ready." Eris gave me a quiet nod, the kind you give someone when you know they're about to change their life, and I left that coffee shop feeling both light and heavy. Light because for the first time I had said it out loud, heavy because now I had to live up to it. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the road beneath me grounding, giving me space to think before stepping back into my small house where the porch light was already on. My son, Tyler, met me at the door, barefoot and hungry, asking if we were still going to Grandpa's for dinner that evening. His brown eyes held that quiet hope I had seen too many times, the one that asked me to keep the family together, even if it tore me apart. "Yeah, baby, we're going," I said, brushing his hair back and kissing the top of his head. "Just let me change." I stood in my bedroom for a moment, looking at myself in the mirror, seeing the tired lines, the set jaw. I touched the handkerchief in my pocket, feeling the stitching that spelled hope against my fingers, reminding me of my mother's last words, telling me not to let them decide who I was. I breathed in, grabbed my keys, and we left. The drive to my father's house in Westlake was quiet, the sky shifting from blue to the kind of burnt orange that only Texas knows how to give. Tyler scrolled on his phone, and I let him, grateful for the silence. When we pulled up, the driveway was already crowded with familiar cars, and the porch was lit with those string lights my father liked to hang for gatherings, the kind that made everything feel cozy, even when it wasn't. Inside, the smell of brisket and garlic bread wrapped around us as soon as we stepped in. I set the casserole I brought on the counter, and before I could take off my jacket, Isolde's voice cut through the chatter. "Venna, you're finally here. We were just talking about you," she said, her smile sweet and sharp, her arm sliding around my shoulder like a vice. I forced a small laugh. "I'm here." Isolde's hand squeezed before letting go, and she turned back to the living room, where she was holding court, telling stories of closing deals and pushing the company to new heights. Dad sat in his recliner, nodding proudly, adding, "That's my girl," every so often. I moved around quietly, refilling drinks, checking on the bread, setting out forks, catching glances from cousins who smiled politely and whispered behind cupped hands. I tried to disappear into the corners, focusing on the mundane tasks to distract from the burn rising in my chest as Isolde talked about her latest strategies, the same ones I had spent months developing, testing with clients and refining after hours when everyone else had gone home. She was halfway through her second glass of wine when she raised it, calling for everyone's attention. "To family?" she said, pausing just enough to let the room hush. "And to knowing when to be strong in business? Some of us think we can get by on kindness alone, but the world doesn't reward weakness. It rewards results." She turned, locking eyes with me, letting a smirk curl on her lips before she drank. There was a small laugh in the room, an awkward one, but no one said anything. Dad clapped lightly, and someone muttered, "She's not wrong." I felt my hand tighten around the glass I was holding, my knuckles whitening. The sound of the glass cracking under my grip pulled my attention back before I loosened my hold, carefully setting it down. Across the room, Tyler was watching, his phone lowered, his young face trying to process what had just happened, the way people could humiliate others in plain sight while calling it family. I forced a smile at him, but the moment cracked something in me. I remembered Mom's voice in my mind, soft but firm. Don't let them tell you who you are. I swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in my eyes, and excused myself, telling Dad I needed some air. He nodded, distracted, as Isolde started another story about cutting dead weight and moving forward with people who could keep up. I slipped onto the back porch, the night air cool against my skin, the sky above wide and scattered with stars that seemed to watch without judgment. I sat down on the steps, pulling the handkerchief from my pocket, clutching it as the tears came, quiet and hot, leaving streaks down my cheeks. I cried for the years I had let them tell me I was less because I refused to be cruel. I cried for the times I swallowed my voice so the room would stay calm, for the way I kept showing up, setting tables, clearing dishes, letting them steal what I had worked for while telling me it was just business. I cried because Tyler had seen it, and I realized I was teaching him to accept the same silence I had lived with, teaching him that his mother would bend to keep others comfortable. I didn't want that for him. I didn't want that for me. I wiped my tears with the handkerchief, looking up at the stars that seemed to blink back, as if urging me forward. Tomorrow, I whispered, my voice steadying, I will not let them use me again. When I stepped back inside from the porch, I found Tyler already curled on the couch, half asleep with the TV flickering soft blue across his face. I switched off the lamp, kissed his forehead, and whispered, tomorrow, reminding myself that promises to yourself only mean something if you keep them. I woke before sunrise, the sky still that deep navy that makes you feel like the world hasn't started yet, and maybe for a moment you can gather yourself before it does. I stood at the sink with my coffee, the steam curling into the cold morning, thinking about the promise I made under those stars, about the silent vow tucked into the fabric of that handkerchief in my bag. I got dressed, fixing my hair, putting on the soft blue blouse I liked because it made me feel calm, and kissed Tyler on the head before dropping him off at school. The drive to the office felt different. The same cracked roads, the same stoplights, but I wasn't dragging myself toward another day of quiet surrender. My hands on the wheel felt steady, my chest clearer than it had been in weeks. I parked and sat for a moment, letting the engine tick itself cool while I checked my messages. That's when I saw it, Corbin's name lighting up on my phone screen. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since that networking event where he'd shaken my hand firmly, looked me in the eye and said, "If you ever need someone in your corner, call me." "Morning, Corbin," I answered, trying to keep my voice even. "Venna, we need to talk, privately." Something in the way he said it sent a jolt through me, but I managed a small laugh. "Is this the part where you tell me I'm in trouble?" "No," he said, firm but kind. "This is the part where we start making things right. Can you meet me after work?" I glanced up at the building in front of me, at the windows where I knew Isolde would be pacing, waiting to pounce with her bright smile and dismissive praise. "Yeah, I can." Inside, the day moved in its usual rhythm, but I wasn't moving the same way anymore. Isolde was already in the office, bright red lipstick on, leaning against my desk with a coffee cup she never finished, scrolling through her phone. "Venna, did you send out those follow-up emails yet? We can't afford to be sloppy." Her voice was sweet in the way poison can be sweet, and I nodded, opening my laptop, letting her think I was following every order. I let her hover, telling me how to respond to a client I had nurtured from the first cold call, telling me which phrasing she preferred, cutting me off mid-sentence in front of others, using that tone that said, "I'm only trying to help." She called me into her office around 11, showing me her calendar with joint meetings she scheduled without asking, saying, "I need you to take notes during these calls. We don't want to lose any details." I smiled, small and tight, and wrote it down while she talked, but inside, I was recording everything else. The way she leaned back, claiming credit for my projects, the smirk she flashed when she called my work drafts, while hers were presentations. Every little dismissal became another tally in a quiet ledger I was building, not on paper but inside, where it mattered more. At lunch, I sat in my car with the air conditioning running low, the hum of it keeping me company while I pulled out Eris's card again, running my thumb across the handwritten number on the back. I thought about what it would feel like to walk into Peyton Analytics one last time, to pack up my things with my head held high, and to never again stand in front of Isolde pretending to be grateful for scraps of praise. The fear was there, a knot in my stomach. But next to it was something else, that small, sharp spark that said, "You can do this." The afternoon crawled, every email and meeting another reminder of why I had to leave. By the time 5:30 rolled around, the sun was starting to drop, making the windows glow gold as I gathered my bag. Isolde walked by, tapping her nails on my desk. "Heading out already?" she asked, eyebrows raised, voice sugar slick. "Busy evening?" "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. "Something like that." She gave a tight smile, one that didn't reach her eyes, and walked away, already moving on to the next thing she could control. I drove downtown, the city lights starting to flicker on as the sky dimmed, parking in a small lot behind Corbin's office building. The air smelled like the promise of rain, and for a moment I stood there, breathing it in before walking up the steps and pulling open the heavy glass door. Corbin was waiting inside, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, and a folder in his hand. He didn't waste time with small talk, just gestured for me to sit. "I looked into the documents you sent over," he started, sliding papers toward me, each one heavy with meaning I hadn't fully grasped until now. "Your ownership credits, quietly wiped out, but without proper notification. And this," he tapped a page, "is the provisional patent Isolde filed for that system she's touting as hers." My eyes scanned the dates, the signatures, the email trails. Corbin flipped another page, showing my original notes, time-stamped and emailed to myself months before Isolde had even touched the project. "You have a case," he said, leaning back, "if you want it." I sat there, the weight of everything crashing over me. But for once it wasn't crushing. It was clarifying. Isolde's power wasn't invincible, wasn't untouchable. The fear I had lived under for years cracked just a little, letting in something brighter. I looked up at Corbin, my voice quiet but clear. "I'm not going to let them erase me." He nodded, a small smile on his lips. "Then let's make sure they don't." When I stepped out of Corbin's office, the city lights were reflected in the windshield of my car, the world outside buzzing with people heading home, grabbing dinner, living lives that didn't know the quiet war I had been fighting. As I sat there for a moment, the handkerchief in my pocket warm from my hand, I whispered to myself, "They don't get to erase me anymore." I started the car, pulling out into the slow Austin traffic, headlights gliding over the quiet faces of people waiting at bus stops, people just trying to get home, people who didn't know that tonight something had changed inside me. The city hummed around me, but for once it didn't drown out my own voice. When I got home, Tyler was in the kitchen, microwaving leftovers. He looked up, his eyes searching mine the way only a child's can, as if he could see the weight I carried in every step. "Mom, you okay?" I managed a small smile, ruffling his hair. "I'm getting there, baby." We sat together at the table, the hum of the microwave, the clink of forks on plates, the silence that was comfortable. I let him talk about his day, about the quiz he thought he failed but didn't, about how he wanted to try out for soccer. I nodded, listening, holding on to the normalcy before the storm I knew was coming. That night, as he fell asleep on the couch, I packed my bag for the next day like I always did. Laptop, chargers, my worn planner, and at the last moment, I slipped my mother's handkerchief into the side pocket. It felt like tucking courage beside me, a reminder that I wasn't walking into that building to be silent anymore. The morning was cold enough that my breath fogged in front of me as I walked across the parking lot toward Peyton Analytics. The glass doors reflected my face, tired but determined, as I pulled them open and stepped inside. the scent of burnt coffee and old carpet greeting me like it always did. Inside, Isolde was already in the hallway, coffee cup in hand, her laugh bright as she spoke to a group of junior staff who hung on her words. Her eyes flicked to me as I passed, her smile tightening just enough for me to see it. "Morning, Venna," she called, syrupy sweet. "Hope you're ready for the meeting today." I nodded once, not stopping, but I could feel her eyes on me as I walked to my desk. I set down my bag, pulling out the folders Corbin had given me, the documents that proved what I had built, what I had created, and I placed them neatly beside my laptop. Mid-morning, the email popped into my inbox. Team meeting, conference room B, mandatory. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath, before gathering my things and heading toward the room. The conference table was already half full when I arrived, people chatting quietly, the air thick with the usual tension that came whenever Isolde was about to speak. She walked in 5 minutes later, heels clicking, wearing that power blue blazer she loved, the one she thought made her look like a CEO. She didn't bother to sit, placing her coffee cup on the table, looking around with that practiced smile. "Good morning, team," she began, her voice bright, confident, like she owned every inch of the space. "I want to share with you the strategy that has been driving our client retention to new heights." She started talking, clicking through slides that were nothing more than my own work, my phrasing, my structure, delivered in her voice with her smile, as if I didn't exist, as if I wasn't sitting right there, breathing in every stolen word. "Some people," she said, pausing for effect, "think that chatting with clients being friendly is enough. It's not. We need structure, accountability, real systems." A few people chuckled nervously, eyes flicking to me, then away just as quickly. The heat rose in my face, but I stayed still, hands folded in my lap, my mother's handkerchief pressed between my fingers under the table. She kept talking, moving through slide after slide, praising herself, dismissing the small efforts of others, each word a needle pushing deeper under my skin. And then she looked directly at me, her smile sharp. "I think we can all agree," she said, "that it's time we stop wasting time on soft approaches that don't work." Something in me snapped, quietly, like a string pulled too tight for too long. I raised my hand. The room fell silent, eyes shifting toward me, the air thick and heavy. Isolde's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. "Yes, Venna?" I stood, my legs steady, my voice calm. "Can we clarify the source of these strategies you're presenting?" The silence cracked, a murmur running through the room. Isolde's lips pressed together, the corner of her eye twitching before she answered. "These are strategies I developed through years of experience, Venna." I reached down, pulling out my folder, sliding it across the table so everyone could see. Because I have documents, dated emails, and client feedback that show these strategies were developed under my management, with my clients, using my systems. She laughed, sharp and short. "Venna, you're just an admin with too much time on your hands. Let's not confuse taking notes with leadership." I felt the fear, the old instinct to shrink back, to swallow the words, to keep the peace. But I saw Tyler's face in my mind, the way he looked at me, wanting to know if it was okay to stand up for yourself. I met Isolde's eyes. "You can call me anything you want, but you don't get to call my work garbage while using it to build your reputation." The silence returned, thicker this time, the room frozen as everyone waited for what would happen next. Isolde's mouth opened, but no words came out, and for the first time, I saw it. The crack in her confidence, the realization that I wasn't going to disappear this time, and in that moment, I felt something shift inside, a quiet, powerful click that told me the fear was gone. The silence in the room was heavy, and as Isolde glared at me, I felt something shift inside. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I picked up my folder, walked out of that room, and knew it was time to build something that was truly mine. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed faintly as I walked back to my cubicle, each step feeling like a small reclaiming of the ground I had let Isolde walk all over for too long. I sat down, opened my laptop, and started working, even as I could feel her eyes on me from across the office. For the rest of that day, she didn't say a word. No comments, no eye rolls, no digs disguised as feedback. But I noticed how the tasks I usually handled began to disappear from my queue. Calls from clients I had nurtured were suddenly being transferred elsewhere without explanation. I heard whispers by the water cooler, and the way people glanced away quickly when I caught them looking told me everything. Isolde wasn't coming at me directly now. She was isolating me, cutting me off, slowly pushing me toward the edge, thinking I would slip away quietly. That night, I got home later than I planned, traffic on the 360 crawling, headlights weaving in and out as I replayed the day in my head. Tyler was already in the kitchen, rummaging for a snack before bed. He looked up, a peanut butter jar in one hand, his expression soft but concerned. "Mom, why do you let her treat you like this?" I paused, the grocery bag still in my arms, the weight of his question heavier than anything I carried. I set the bag down, pulling him into a hug, resting my chin on the top of his head. "I'm working on it," I whispered, and I meant it. After he went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, the glow from the overhead light buzzing as I opened my laptop. My mother's handkerchief lay beside me, its fabric worn but strong, reminding me of every time she had stood quietly in the corner during family arguments, her voice unheard, her sacrifices invisible. I wasn't going to be her. Not this time. I logged into the internal systems at Peyton Analytics and began to review client records tied to my projects. I had kept detailed notes, dates, upsell structures, personal connections I had built. As I cross-checked records, something began to stand out. Payments from clients I had closed were being rerouted into accounts I didn't recognize. Upsells that had my signature were marked as handled by Peyton Special Accounts, which didn't exist in our formal financial structure. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I copied the data, creating backups and encrypting the files before emailing them to Corbin with a single sentence, "We need to talk." Sleep didn't come easy that night. I lay in bed, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, my mind racing as I thought about the scope of what I had found. This wasn't just stolen credit or bruised pride. This was theft, and it was tied to Isolde's personal LLC, the one she always called her consulting hobby when she bragged at family dinners. The next morning, I left Tyler with a hug and a promise I would be home for dinner. Driving to work, I repeated that promise to myself, my mother's handkerchief folded neatly in my pocket, grounding me every time I touched it. At lunch, Corbin called. I stepped outside, sitting in my car with the engine off, the Texas heat already making the air thick. "Venna," he said, voice calm but tight. "What you sent me is serious. If this checks out, it's corporate fraud, and it's enough to trigger an investigation. Are you ready for that?" I looked out the windshield, watching a woman walking her dog, her life likely full of worries I would never know, just as she would never know mine. "Yes," I said. "It's time." When I returned to the office, Isolde was standing near my cubicle, flipping through a folder that clearly wasn't hers to read. Her eyes lifted, and she smiled, tight and cold. "Venna, we need to talk about your priorities. We can't have you wasting time on low-level tasks when we need you focused." I held her gaze. "You mean the tasks you've been giving to everyone else while you push me into a corner?" Her smile twitched. "Don't play the victim, Venna. You're not as important as you think." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned back to my desk, opened my laptop, and continued documenting every irregularity, every redirected payment, every piece of evidence that would show the truth. For the first time, I didn't feel fear when she hovered near me, trying to rattle me with her silence. Later that evening, after dinner and dishes, after Tyler had finished his homework and was watching TV, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Stop digging, or you'll regret it." My hands trembled as I locked the screen, staring into the darkened window where I saw my reflection staring back. Older, tired, but awake in a way I hadn't been in years. I placed my phone on the table, reached for my mother's handkerchief, and held it tight. This wasn't just about getting back at Isolde. It wasn't even about the money or the credit. It was about telling the truth, about not letting myself be silenced, about showing Tyler that standing up matters, even when it's terrifying. As I turned off my phone and stared into the dark, I realized it was no longer about revenge. It was about finally telling the truth. Morning came heavy. I washed my face, letting the cold water clear the blur in my mind, and caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't look like a woman gearing up for a fight. I looked like a mother who was tired of letting fear be her compass. I was pulling into the parking lot at Peyton Analytics when my phone rang. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear while I watched the entrance. "Venna!" Isolde's voice snapped through the line, sharp like the first crack of a whip. "My office, now." I paused before responding, steadying my breath. "I'll be there in a minute." Walking into her office felt like walking into a freezer. She didn't offer me a seat. Instead, she leaned against the edge of her desk, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of her lips, like she was about to enjoy what came next. "You think you're clever, digging around in things that don't concern you," she said, her eyes glinting like shards of glass. "You're risking everything, Venna. And for what? Some childish crusade?" I stood there, letting her words hang, letting the silence remind her that I was no longer going to fill it with apologies. "You can't threaten me with what I'm ready to leave behind," I said calmly, and for a second her face dropped before snapping back into her mask. She straightened up, brushing imaginary lint off her sleeve. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said, turning to leave. "You did." I returned to my desk, half expecting to find security standing there, ready to escort me out, but the world continued, the office humming around me, pretending nothing had happened. But under that hum was a new tension, an energy that I could feel in the way people glanced at me, quickly looking away. That afternoon my phone started ringing, one call after another from clients I'd worked with for years. The first call was from Karen, a client who had become almost like family over the years. "Venna, are you leaving Peyton?" she asked, worry and hope tangled in her voice. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "I'm considering what's best for me and my son." "Well," she sighed, "I just want you to know that wherever you go, we'll be there." More calls came. Clients telling me they heard rumors, asking if they should start moving accounts, letting me know that it was me they trusted, not the name on the building. Each call was a reminder that my worth wasn't tied to Isolde's permission. Later that day, I met Eris at a quiet coffee shop off Lamar, away from the eyes of the office and the stale air of tension. She slid a fresh cup of coffee across to me, her eyes steady. "The offer stands," she said, not bothering with small talk. $960,000, equity, your own team, your approach, your name. But if you want this, Venna, you need to leave clean. If you drag this through mud, they'll try to ruin you. Let your work and your clients speak for you." I nodded, holding the warm cup in my hands, letting the steam wash over my face. "I know," I said. "I'm ready." Driving home, I felt the tightness in my chest ease, just slightly. Tyler was waiting in the living room when I walked in, pretending to be busy with homework but glancing up every few seconds. "Hey," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "Hey," he replied, closing his laptop. "You look tired." I laughed, a soft, tired sound, and sat down across from him. "I might leave my job," I said, letting the words settle between us. His eyes widened. "Are you scared?" I thought about it, letting the silence answer before I did. "Yeah, I am, but sometimes the right thing is the scary thing." That night, I made dinner, letting the small routines of chopping vegetables and stirring sauce remind me that life was still moving forward, no matter what storm was brewing. After Tyler went to bed, I sat down at the kitchen table, my laptop open, the glow of the screen painting the room in soft light. I opened a new document and began to type my resignation letter, the words coming easier than I expected. I included a summary of what I had found: the fraudulent transactions, the rerouted payments, the betrayal that had become a pattern. I attached copies of the evidence, ensuring it would reach the CEO and the board. Next to my laptop sat my mother's handkerchief, its stitches reading "Hope," the fabric worn but still holding strong. I looked at it as I hit "Save," letting the weight of the moment press into me without crushing me. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and whispered into the quiet house, "Tomorrow, I walk away." The dawn was quiet, that heavy kind of quiet that sits on your shoulders, making every movement feel like a promise you can't break. I dressed slowly, pulling on a simple black blazer, slipping my mother's Hope handkerchief into the inside pocket, letting the fabric brush against my heart. As I tied my hair back, I saw Tyler standing in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. "Big day?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," I said, meeting his eyes in the mirror. "It's a day for telling the truth." On the drive to Peton Analytics, the sky over Austin was streaked with morning gold, the traffic lights blinking red then green, a rhythm steady enough to calm the racing in my chest. I parked, turned off the engine, and for a moment I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, reminding myself that fear had never truly protected me. Walking through the front doors, the office felt different. People looked up from their screens as I passed, their gazes holding questions they were too polite or too afraid to ask. I nodded to a few, offering a small, steady smile, but I didn't stop. Today wasn't about small talk. By the time the department meeting was called, the tension in the air was almost visible. Isolde stood at the front of the conference room, her posture perfect, voice warm as she spoke about our collective vision for the next quarter, weaving in phrases from my strategy as if they were her birthright. She laughed at her own jokes, the room echoing with polite chuckles. I let her finish her sentence before I stood up, pushing back my chair carefully so the sound didn't break my resolve. The room fell silent, heads turning, eyes widening. Isolde's lips twitched, a flash of irritation breaking her practiced calm. "Venna," she said, the word sharp like a pebble flicked at a window. "I have something to say," I replied, my voice clear, not shaking the way I feared it might. I pulled the resignation letter from my bag, the paper warm from where it had rested against me all morning. I stepped forward and handed it directly to the CEO, who had joined the meeting today, claiming it was to support team unity. His eyebrows lifted as he took the letter, reading the first few lines before looking back up at me. "I am resigning effective immediately," I continued, my eyes fixed on Isolde. "Due to ongoing professional misconduct, ethical breaches, and a toxic environment fostered by management, I can no longer be part of this company." Someone gasped, a soft intake of breath that sounded louder than it should have in the quiet room. Isolde's mouth opened, but before she could speak, I opened the file I had brought, spreading the documents across the conference table. Records, emails, financial statements, the truth laid bare under the fluorescent lights. "These are copies of transactions and communications showing repeated client manipulation and financial misconduct," I said, my tone even. "I have retained counsel, and this information has been secured elsewhere as well." Isolde stepped forward, her face pale but her voice cold. "You're trying to sabotage this company out of spite. You're nothing more than a disgruntled admin." "Don't," I said, holding her gaze. "You don't get to call my work worthless while you use it to build your reputation. Your threats don't work anymore." The CEO's jaw tightened as he flipped through the documents, looking at Isolde with a weight in his eyes that even she couldn't dodge. I could feel the shift in the room as others glanced at each other, realization dawning that what they suspected about Isolde wasn't just gossip. As I turned to leave, the room behind me erupted in whispers. The CEO's voice, quiet but firm, cut through them. "Isolde, please stay. We need to discuss this now." I didn't look back as I walked through the office, each step lighter than the last. I grabbed my bag from my desk, taking one final look around the space where I had spent so many hours fighting to be seen, to matter, to be more than just the helpful little sister. I stepped outside, the spring air warm against my face, and let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for years. I crossed the parking lot, and as I lifted my eyes, I saw the black SUV parked at the curb. Eris leaned against it, her arms folded, a small smile breaking across her face when she saw me. For a moment, everything slowed. The breeze lifted a strand of hair across my cheek, the scent of fresh-cut grass from the landscaping, the distant sound of traffic humming on the highway. I realized for the first time, I was free. As I reached the black SUV, Eris stepped forward and opened the door for me, her eyes holding a quiet pride that matched the trembling relief in my chest. I settled into the back seat, the soft hum of the engine mixing with the rhythm of my breath as she handed me the thick folder with the finalized contract inside. I took a moment to let the weight of it settle into my hands, letting my fingers trace over my name typed cleanly at the top of the page. The number, the equity, the promise of building something that wouldn't be stolen from me, all laid out in black and white. I thought about the years I spent chasing scraps of approval, the small moments I convinced myself were enough to justify the silence I wrapped around my own dreams. I looked at Eris, who simply nodded, her expression calm but firm, and she said, "Whenever you're ready, Venna." I clicked the pen open. For a second, the world felt quiet, holding its breath with me as I signed my name with slow, steady strokes. When I lifted the pen, a tear slid down my cheek, not from regret, but from the sudden, breathtaking realization that I had chosen myself. Eris smiled gently. "Welcome to your future." We drove through the streets of Austin, the early evening sun spilling gold over the buildings, and I rested my head against the window, allowing a peace I hadn't felt in years to sink into my bones. Later that night, Tyler and I sat on the living room floor, a pizza box open between us, our laughter mixing with the hum of the ceiling fan. The apartment was still small, still cluttered with textbooks and soccer cleats, but it felt like a sanctuary now. Tyler looked up from his slice, his eyes serious. "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I paused, reaching over to brush a crumb from his cheek, and smiled. "We're going to be better than okay." He grinned, leaning into my side, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe it. Over the next few days, messages trickled in. Former clients reached out, not with complaints or questions, but with quiet words of support, letting me know they were moving their business to wherever I would build next. Each message was like a small stone lifting from my shoulders, a reminder that people had seen me even when I felt invisible. And then came the news I didn't expect, but knew was coming. Isolde had been placed on leave pending an investigation. The CEO had called for a full audit, citing concerns about ethical violations and client trust. Word spread that clients were leaving Peyton Analytics in waves, many of them asking if I would take them on, if I would continue to care for their needs the way I always had. I received a message from my father one evening, his words careful. "Why did you leave so suddenly?" I read the message 3 times before replying, my fingers steady on the screen. "Because I finally chose myself." There was no reply, and for once I didn't need one. I placed my phone down and leaned back in my chair, letting the silence of the moment hold me. It wasn't a silence of dismissal or erasure. It was a silence filled with peace. In my new office, a small space with second-hand furniture and a fresh coat of paint, I placed my mother's hope handkerchief on the corner of my desk. Each time I glanced at it, I reminded myself that this wasn't selfish. This was survival. This was freedom. One evening, after reviewing client notes and finalizing new contracts, I shut down my computer and stepped outside. The Texas sky was a deep indigo, stars just beginning to pierce through, and a warm breeze swept across my face. I stood there for a while, breathing in the soft night air, letting it fill every corner that had once been tight with fear. I no longer needed Isolde's approval. I no longer needed anyone else's definition of my worth. I walked toward my car, the gravel crunching softly under my shoes, and paused before opening the door. The reflection of the stars on the windshield felt like a promise, quiet but strong. I whispered to the cool air, letting the words be carried away into the night. I am not invisible. Not anymore. Some stories don't end with a loud victory. Sometimes they end with a quiet promise kept to yourself, and that's enough.